worked on this little aircraft. I spent a dozen years in the games industry working at Microsoft and real networks, and now I have a fool for a boss because I work for myself. We're going to start off with a game. Let's invent a game. Let's say that I roll one die, and if it turns out to be a 1, 2, or a 3, I give you $1. If it turns out to be a 4, 5, or 6, you give me $1. Question I'm going to ask you, it's a rhetorical question. Would you play this game? How about we change the rules? So rather than a 3 there, we have a 3 there. If it's a 1 or a 2, I give you $1. If it's a 3, 4, 5, or 6, you give me $1. How about now? Any takers? So how would we go about finding out whether that was a good game or a bad game? Well, there are two basic ways of doing it. One is experimentation. We just do it again. We sum up all the results. The other way is to a formal model, a mathematical model. If you go back to school, you've got a 1 or a 2, there's a 2/6 chance of it happening, 3, 4, 5, 4, 6. Oh, that has disappeared. I pushed the wrong button. Recovered. Experimentation, it's really easy to write. You don't understand the mechanics of it, you just roll it, mathematical model it. You don't need to understand the complex mechanics. What's bad about it is you need many runs to get sufficient accuracy. If the game is quite complicated, you may have to do millions and millions of runs. And a difficult part about that is if there's one leg that doesn't happen very often, it only happens 1 in a million times. If you only run the game 1,000,000 times, you're probably not going to exercise that part. So if there's some really weird part that doesn't get exposed very often, you're not going to model it very well. Formal modeling gives you an exact answer, but it's really difficult to be right. These are given sort of fancy names, objective approaches, Bayesian approach you'll hear talk about. The last thing I kind of really need to talk about before I get into the presentation is this concept of expected outcome. Again, when I actually roll my dice, what it sort of says is that a formal model is going to give you an answer straight away, whereas there's a formula here at the bottom, whereas with an experimentation model, you're going to get closer and closer and closer until you find the asymptote to the right solution. Okay, that bit out of the way, let's try a little bit more complicated example. Let's say that we roll 3 dice. This is kind of a made-up game, but if the 3 odd numbers, we re-roll the 2 lowest dice. If there's 2 odd numbers, we roll the single lowest dice. Then we sum them all up. If it's all odd, we add the high number again. If the total is greater than 17, I give you $7. Otherwise, you give me $3. Would you play this game? I don't know. So how do we go about doing it? Well, we want to try and model it. If we did it by a subjective approach we talked about before, then we'd have to model the first die and the second die, then sort of work out which is the highest one. And it's going to get sort of really complex very, very quickly. So in this particular case, the subjective approach is probably not the best way to solve that particular problem. So we roll out the Monte Carlo simulation, the idea of just play the game by randomly rolling the dice and do it lots and lots of times. And yes, it is named after the casino. So this is an example of what it looks like. You can see the spiky sort of sawtooth because we re-roll on the odd numbers. Here's 17, and what we sort of find out that after playing 1,000,000 games, 76% of the time we were over here, and 23% of the time we're over here. So here we lose $3, here we gain $7. And work out our expected answer, we find out that we're on average going to lose about 66 cents. So the answer is, should you play this game? Probably not. Okay, that was kind of a weird example. Now let's actually look at some sort of real game examples. Anybody played Snakes and Ladders, or Chutes and Ladders, as it's called over here in America? Well, how long does a game of Chutes and Ladders last? The shortest path really sort of takes 7 rolls. There's one here, you can do a 6 and a 6, and you got the ladder, then it's a 6 and a 6, then you get a 4, and hey, we get to a win. But how long does an average game take? Well, again, we do a Monte Carlo simulation. We can just model the board, we can just roll a dice, roll a dice, roll a dice. And after playing, I think it's 1 billion games I actually played here, you can see there's a curve here. No game lasts 7 moves, and up it goes, and here we get this particular curve. And yes, it was 1 billion games. And a modal number of moves is 20. That means, what's the most likely number of moves? And so if you're playing with your kids, it's going to average about 20 moves. This is a cumulative graph showing what percentage completing that number of moves or less. And here we say that 97% of games take less than 100 moves. And it also allows us to work out something called a median, which is there's as many games take less than 29 moves as take over. And again, just sort of what kind of average you're looking for. The modal game is 20, the median is 29. And the arithmetic mean is 36. Okay, if we want to do a subjective approach, there's a famous guy, Andrei Andreevich Markov, and he said what you can do is you can model games by a series of states, and then the transitions and the probabilities go between them. So if I'm in state 1, I could go to state 2, state 3, state 4, and what I do is create what the probabilities of, if I'm in this particular state, I can move to all the other ones. And in the game of Chutes and Ladders, we create some of the stochastic process. That's the fancy way of saying all the probabilities add up to 1. Something's going to happen. So if I was actually on square G, if I roll the dice, there's a 1/6 chance I go to square G plus 1, 1/6 chance G plus 2, all the way through from here. Again, stochastic, something has to happen. I have to go to one of those 6 squares. Crucial to using something called a Markov chain is it's a memoryless system. I'm agnostic as to how I got to square G. If you mention it doesn't matter how I got there, but once I'm there, what is the probability I can need to move to each of those states? And all the probabilities add up to 1, we've talked about. What we do is we create a transition matrix, and we say, well, hey, if I'm at state I, and I'm going to go to sort of state J, we create a matrix which tells me what is the probability of moving from that square to the next square. And here we have the transition matrix for the basics of a Chutes and Ladders game. We can see if we were on square 11, there's a 1/6 chance I go to square 12, 1/6, 13, all the way here. And there's like a leading diagonal. It's pretty simple. Then we complicate things very slightly because we have snakes or chutes here, and we have ladders. They're like hyperspace bypasses. And if you look at here, if we're on square 18, there's a 1/6 chance that I can go to square 19, 1/6 chance to go to square 20, but no, I don't land on 20. I slide down the snake, I end up at square 9, so there's a 1/6 chance I go there. Same with 21, 22, and then when I get to square 23, I can never land on square 23, I go up to 28. So this modifies the matrix a little bit. We have to be slightly careful. Some squares you can get to in more than one way. If we start on square 50, you can see I can go 1, 2, 3 to get to square 53. But if I actually counted to 6, I'd land on the snake and go back. So there's 2 ways I could land on square 53. And sure enough, this is a 2/6 probability here. And the final thing we have to be careful, certainly in the rules of our house, you don't actually get an exact number to roll to get to the end. So when you get to the end, you'll see that there's a 4/6 chance, if you're on square 99, of completing to the end. Once we have this complete matrix together, what we do is we put in a starting state. So here's where I'm starting. And then when you're playing Chutes and Ladders, you start at state 0. You're off the board. And then you multiply by all the probabilities, and you get the results. So here's our Snakes and Ladders board. And after one roll of the dice, or the die, here's where we could be. There's a 1/6 chance of being on square, you can never land on square 1, because 1 takes you straight up the ladder up to here. All these are about 1/6 probability. And this is the trick to sort of Markov. It's wash, rinse, repeat. What you actually do is now take the ending states, push them back, and use these as the new input. Multiply it round, do your matrix manipulation, and you get some new output states. And it's a superposition of all those probabilities. So here's how it looks. On our first roll, that's where we were. On our second roll, now it tells us we get this probability density function about where we're going to be. We're much more likely to be these squares. If we manage to get up the ladder, there's a 1/6 chance of going from all these ladders we've gone up from here. And I don't know how well the contrast shows on here, but here we've got square, roll 3, roll 4, roll 5, roll 6, roll 7. You can't make out the contrast here, but by the time we get to roll 7, there's a finite chance that we can actually sort of get all the way there, about 2 times in every 1,000 games, and roll 8. By the time we get to roll 20 or roll 100, we're getting a very strong probability because the game's most likely to be over. I have a slight animation here showing what it is. Roll 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is just iterating around, working out what the matrix is. We'll skip that, it's not very exciting. This is the curve that was generated using the Markov chain as opposed to the Monte Carlo. And let's actually compare the two of them together. That was our formal model, and there was our experimentation model. We put them together. Well, hey, the curves match. And if we look at them very closely, you just get a little high-frequency noise on here. This is just related to our random number generator not perfectly getting things out. So it's proof that, modeling it one way, modeling it the other way, we get the same answer, which is always a good feeling. A couple of trivia takeaways. Not all ladders are equal. This is the distribution of what ladders are used and what snakes are used. It's kind of nice to know that this ladder here is used 16.66% of the time. And the idea of, the only way you can get on this ladder is by rolling a 1 to start off, and there's no way to get back to it. A couple of other interesting things that you may not know about sort of Chutes and Ladders. If you add extra snakes, it's possible to decrease the average number of moves. So how could that be possible? It's only a bad thing when I landed a snake. But if you put a snake in sufficient place that it allows you to get a second crack at the whip at one of these long ladders, you missed it the first time. There's another snake that takes you back to have another go at it. By actually adding snakes, you can actually reduce the average length of the game. Candyland. I don't know if anybody's played Candyland. Here's another example. For here, though, Candyland is not a memoryless system. With Chutes and Ladders, it was agnostic how you got to a certain square. But with Candyland, you play with a set of cards. Once a card's used, you can't use it again. So it's a little bit like playing blackjack, which is why count carders have an advantage, that once you've played a card, you know that that card's not in the deck. So the deck gets more concentrated in certain cards. That's really complicated the model. So what we're going to do is try and sort of create what we call a cripple Markov chain. The idea of, well, we'll model it just by saying we draw a card, work on it, then put it back, and then just shuffle the deck again and see how well that goes. We model it, and again, we can do a Markov chain by modeling the transition matrix based on the probability of picking up all those cards. This is what it looks like in terms of the first move, the second move, the third move. And you can see here are these are the, I think that's the ice cream, and that sort of goes through. There's an animation. Very exciting to see. Here, there's a slight difference between the actual Monte Carlo simulation and the Markov simulation. Why? Well, since we're drawing a card and putting it back, there is a chance that we're not going to pick up those magical cards that goes backwards and forwards. So you'll see there's 64 cards a deck. There is a chance that we're not going to get some of those really bad and damaging cards. But it's actually a pretty good model to sort of determine how well your game is balanced. Texas Hold'em poker. You're playing a game of poker with some of your buddies. You know, what is the best starting hand when you're playing a game of poker? It's not just what the hand's there, but you're playing against other people who could have lots of other combinations of cards. And the expected outcome is kind of complicated because some cards can make straights, some cards can make flushes, and it's the superposition of the chance of the cards that you have that you can make different combinations of cards. And the other subtle part is the odds change depending on the number of people at the table. If you and I are playing head-to-head at a game of poker, and there's a gut shot straight appears out in front of you, the chance that one of having the card complete the straight is very low. With 10 people at the table, somebody's bound to have the card that's going to complete the straight. So the average hand required to win becomes a little bit higher, and so the value of your starting cards changes as well. Combinatronics are just sort of too complex. With just two players, you've got this sort of huge combination of cards. By the time you've got to sort of 10 players of the game, the odds are just immense. You're never going to work out, enumerate all the possible combinations of ways to sort of go through. So again, using a sort of Monte Carlo simulation, this is an idea of what things look like with playing two players. It's a little bit complicated, but I'll explain. There are 169 possible starting hands from pocket aces, pocket kings, all the way here. These are all the suited cards. Here are the unsuited cards. Red is good, gold is okay, green, blue. Ones that are shaded color, what we call positive expected value. If you stayed in with these colored handed cards, you have a positive expected value. You'd win against an automaton if you only stayed in with a color shaded cards. What we can see here, there's a lot of symmetry down the leading diagonal. The value of suits doesn't become very important. Ace, king suited, ace, king are kind of about the same, and you can see there's a lot of reflection around the leading diagonal here. By the time we get to 10 players at a table, the odds have changed sort of quite significantly. If you don't have suited cards, you're in a really bad state. And you know, cards that you think are really good, like ace-8, are just really bad cards when you're sort of playing with a lot of players. And even things like loosely connected cards, jack-7 suited, who would have thought that? Well, 7, 8, 9, 10, jack. It's possible to make a straight with those cards. So cards that you could possibly make a straight are actually sort of weighted a lot higher than cards that you can't make a straight, even though they potentially have a higher value. Risk. I don't know if anybody's played Risk. Classic game. In Risk, the basic mechanic is you roll dice. The attacker can roll up to 3 dice, the defender can roll up to 2 dice, highest dice wins against highest dice, and in a tie, the defender wins. Those are the basic rules. Here, sometimes you might as well just do a brute force. There are only 7,706 possible combinations of all those sort of 5 dice together, so why not just sort of write a little bit of pseudocode here to find out what the highest dice is and sort of compare them. And here we have the results for, we've got a 3 versus 2, 3 versus 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, 1, 2. And you can see the various different probabilities. That's just the basic thing when you get down to a small game, but of course, when you're attacking with armies, you have larger numbers. And so we build up this tree. Again, a little bit complicated, but let's say we're attacking with 7 and defending with 5. One of 3 things could happen. Defender could lose them both, and there's a, if I can actually go on here and see, there is a 2,890 over 776 chance of attacker winning 2. If that goes back. So attacker 3, this is where everybody loses 1, and this is where the attacker loses 2. And then that recursively gets you to another state, another state, another state, all the way to we get down to we know we've got an attacker 1, and we know what the chances are of those things happening. And then we can work out the probabilities by sort of working our way recursively up the chain. Don't try and read it, it's mouse type, sort of with picture pins, 1,000 numbers. Here we have all the possible attackers, all the possible defenders. Shaded red where the attacker has the advantage, it's shaded blue where the defender has an advantage. And as we can see here, after 5 on 5, it changes the attacker having an advantage over the defender. And if you want to look at for things like a 95% confidence level. Strategy tips, you're playing Risk, it's better to attack than defend, so you have to be aggressive. Always attack with superior numbers to maximize the chance of your attack being successful. That's kind of obvious. If attacking a region with the same number of armies as the defender, make sure you have at least 5 armies if you want the odds to be in your favor. And the more you have, the better. So social games, they're all kind of sort of slightly sort of trivial examples, but what happens if you have a social game, and inside your social game you have a casino, and a casino you've got these games that you didn't model correctly, and currency is flowing in and out. And in a social game, you need to control the amount of sources and sinks in your currency, otherwise you're going to get this sort of rampant inflation. You know, here's a dude, he wants to buy something, you know, what's the value of the shield? Well, it's 10 gold pieces in there. Yeah. But if you can go to the casino and just sort of win because you've got the modeling of your game wrong in the casino and you stuff the odds in their favor, the value of the shield, it's not really worth 10 gold pieces because gold pieces are just lying on the ground. It's nearer to 10,000 gold pieces. Why is this important? Well, if you've got real currency and you're buying your in-game currency, all of a sudden you've got rampant inflation. You know, why do people want to spend money on this? And they bought it one day, they get disenfranchised because now they need a wheelbarrow full to sort of be able to buy anything they need to do. Inflation is going to happen over time unless you control the amount of money on your game. And to stop inflation, you need a fixed amount of currency in the game. Well, how do you do that? Well, you kind of need to extract currency at approximately the same rate as currency is flowing in. That's easy to do if you've got a closed box, but it's hard to do in a sort of social environment because you can't control the number of players leading and joining the game. And pretty much anybody goes in the game, they always get a little bit of currency in the back pocket when they join the game. So it's hard to control. So takeaways from this, you need to understand the expected value of your game if you want to balance the mechanics. For more examples about sort of this, you can go to the website, and as promised, the content. Today's presentation is already available here under the Content tab. And with that, I've managed to get ahead with on time. So we even have a chance for questions, and if not, I've got some backup slides if you want to do more. Yes, Sucker, do we have a question?
Thank you. With both approaches, like you said, you showed that with the experimentation, you can show that the formula, the formal process, the formal mathematics actually worked. Mm-hmm. Does this mean that when you're doing things with working out a new formal equation to work something out, then you should do some form of experimentation just to make sure you're on the right track before you start to just trust the math? For anything other than really simple games, formally modeling something is going to take you such an immense amount of time, it's probably not worthwhile. At the end of the day, you just want to say, hey, roll the random numbers at it, just throw all the possible combinations through, and if you've done that sort of millions and millions of times, you're going to get a good answer. I think building a formal model, unless it's something incredibly simple, is going to take you a very long period of time. Yahtzee. What's probably really Yahtzee? Well, while it goes over there. In one roll, it's 1,296, but it's possible to sort of work out the probability again using a Markov chain, saying, okay, I rolled one, I'm in this state, here, how many can match together? And here we can see if I've got 4 correct, I've got a 5/6 chance of still staying in state 4, but I've got a 1/6 chance of me getting the magic number. The thing to watch out for sort of here is if you're rolling a game of Yahtzee, you've got a pair off to one side, and you roll the 3 dice. If you roll the 3 dice, and they all match up together, you're going to pull those 3 off to one side and then re-roll the 2 rather than rolling the 3 again. And that's how those things change. And the answer, if you want to know, once you work through this, is about 4.6%. Yeah, we have another question.
Okay, so question for you. In terms of thinking of a closed game, so for example, you drive over coins, you get points, but you can also, or you get coins, you can also buy coins.
Yeah.
Temple Run being a perfect example of that. Can you give some, and I know every game's different, every situation's different, but can you give some high-level guidance when one is structuring something like that, that makes it make sense for the end user so they're happy, but they're also spending, frankly?
Yeah, if there's no social interaction, who cares? If you're playing a game that's standalone when you're in your own universe, tip the odds in your favor. You're playing a game of solitaire, or for instance, if you can be able to cheat and sort of peek at the card or pay an extra 10 credits to sort of complete and look at what it is. If you're not competing against anyone else, who cares? Even if the odds, it's not a zero-sum game, it doesn't really matter. The only problem is when you're in a game when there's a universe and you're playing against other people who've gone in there. And that's the time you have to worry about things, because then if things are wrong, people can farm and create their own virtuous cycle and create money, which is just going to damage the economy for the rest. So it really is a separate problem. If you're keeping people in a game that there's no social interaction with the currency, it really doesn't matter at all. In fact, it's to your odds. It's like, hey, wow, the slot machine, wow, I always win this slot machine. Isn't it great? I'm super lucky. Great, you feel good, so you spend more money. That's good. Oh, we have another question down here. Todd?
When you talk about like how to control the inflation of the in-game currency, so actually there's really a lot of dimension you can pay attention to. For example, all the active users currency, or like how to define active user, or about like top player, how much cash they have, how control. So do you have the rule of thumb, like which prospect you really need to pay attention to?
The only sort of guidance I can sort of really give is the total amount of money in the game has to be the same. And that means if players sort of come in and you've got fresh users come in with things, you've got to make sure that currency is destroyed through some other method. So basically a sinking. They can go to the store and spend money, and that money never appears somewhere else. They can't convert it to sort of some other goods or services. Just making sure that you destroy it, and so it's the same sum within the game. Okay, if there's no questions, we have 10-minute break, and we're going to start again at 2 o'clock. Thank you.